evening, everyone. My name is Siva Raj, and I'm here really to talk about how you should try and avoid turning 40, or as it's titled here, not how I normalize my blood pressure by improving my fitness. Before I start, though, have any of you ever measured your fitness, your cardiorespiratory fitness? Okay. Hopefully, so one person there. Hopefully, by the end of the session, I'm hoping that all of you would really want to measure your fitness because of the benefits that it does and what it tells you about yourself. So turning 40 has consequences. You think you'll start looking like George Clooney, but actually what happens is that your blood pressure starts to rise. In my case, I was mildly hypertensive, and that, and having seen my dad go through 3 heart attacks in about 10 years, I knew that it was time for me to start doing something. And I wasn't necessarily the most active guy on the planet, but I'd been active. I'd built a fitness app. It still didn't seem to have made me healthy enough for my blood pressure to be normal. So I say, what do I have to do now? And so I looked into the literature, and it looked like fitness was the thing that I had to improve. So fitness is essentially the ability of your body to supply oxygen when your body needs it through doing activity. And so when you improve your fitness, it expands your arteries, it reduces the pressure on your blood, on your arteries, etc. So it normalizes your blood pressure. It's also considered the single best predictor of your overall health. So the American Heart Association thinks it's the single best predictor of cardiovascular disease, mortality, etc. So there's a lot of benefits to actually measuring your fitness, apart from the fact that it improves your blood pressure. How do you measure it? So typically it's done in a exercise science lab where you put on a gas mask and they measure your expired gases and they estimate your VO2 max, which is a unit of measurement. You can also track your energy expenditure and your heart rate and then estimate the same metric. So it's a sub-maximal test, not as precise, but gives you a very good indicator and is more doable in normal practice. So that's what I was attempting to do. So I started off by going back to what I did before, which was using the accelerometer to track activity and other data. And I combined that with a heart rate monitor to capture heart rate. So I was going to look at energy expenditure through the accelerometer and the heart rate data. The first issue I had was that accelerometer data is not very precise when you increase the intensity of your workout, and something that it's kind of established in the literature, but I kind of discovered personally. So you'll see that the red line is what you should be at, and the blue line is what you get from the accelerometer data. So actually increase the speed of your activity, you find that disconnect. So I then switched. So I said, I had to get my measurement right. So I switched to using a bike trainer where I could measure the energy expenditure directly. So I knew exactly how much power I was exerting. On a bike, you generally get 97% efficiency. So what your body experiences is about 97% of what you read from the bike. So it's really a good place to start. And I was going to then combine that with a heart rate monitor, and they were connected via Bluetooth to this iPad so I could get both streams of data simultaneously. Second problem, heart rate monitors don't work. And I'm glad you're using a chest strap, because the ones that I was using was on the wristband monitors. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of them. They work great if you're doing continual activity, right? But they fail when you try and do interval training, when you're doing very quick improvements, increases in your heart rate. So they tend to lag. So you'll see here that generally this is not in sync with my intensity. So it takes a lot of time for it to catch up, and then it doesn't decline when I stay off. So I switched back to a chest strap because I'd used a chest strap before, and then so this is what good data looks like. So you should see heart rate more in sync with your activity, and then decline when you cease activity at a certain rate, and that's different for each individual, right? And so I was working out about 3 times a week, which is kind of the standard recommended frequency for interval training. I was pushing to heart rate max most of those occasions, right? And I was using these 2 combined pieces of data to really measure my fitness, and then extrapolating that out. So here's where I was when I started, 26th of August. It was 11.9, which is basically the average for a 50-year-old. So I'd aged another 10 years extra, basically. And I'd converted VO2 into METs, so that's roughly the calculation. So you can basically these numbers are real, so they basically predict your risk of having a heart attack in the next 10 years. So every 1 MET increase in fitness reduces your risk by about 20%. So it's pretty powerful data. So I was working out, and I was working out, and I was working out, and there was no change in my blood pressure, right? So it stayed exactly the same for 6 months. I lost a lot of weight, so I was borderline obese when I started, so now 196 actually, so 194 when I did this measurement. And I've since then lost more, but that didn't seem to translate into improvement in my blood pressure. I was biking for longer, I was biking faster, but no, it didn't change my blood pressure. So all that activity, yet no effect on blood pressure. And my fitness numbers didn't change too. which on the one side was disappointing, but on the other side was actually validation of kind of the core science, which is that your fitness and your blood pressure tend to be very highly correlated. So when you improve one, you improve the other. But this also allowed me, I was tracking it actually every session, so I was experimenting to see what would actually improve my fitness along this way. And so it allowed me to see if those experiments were working, and clearly all the stuff that I was doing until Jan didn't work in terms of improving my fitness. But then in early in Feb is when I changed to a protocol that then triggered an improvement very quickly, right? So you see that both my systolic and my diastolic both go down pretty dramatically in about 3 to 4 weeks. Weight didn't change.
You just continued that, the same protocol for another 3 months? That's
No. Early in Feb, I changed my protocol. So that's when the thing starts. So in fact, yeah. So if you see the fitness, I wasn't tracking my blood pressure as frequently as I was doing my fitness. So about 5th of Feb is when I actually changed it. So and then within a few weeks, I start seeing an improvement in my fitness, and it's a very dramatic improvement very quickly. So for 6 months, it didn't change, and then very quickly you see an improvement because the protocol starts to work, right? And very quickly you see the results in terms of my blood pressure as well. Right? So what did I change? I basically changed the intensity. So so I was actually doing higher volume, so longer time at a low intensity in terms of interval training, and I reduced the amount of time, in fact halved it, and increased the intensity. So my total workout actually, it was an easier workout, literally. But it gave me more benefit and improved my fitness faster because I pushed intensity up above your anaerobic threshold. Going above the anaerobic threshold is, he's been pointing out too, is actually has tremendous benefits. It engages a larger group of your muscles. It creates more change internally. So net, what would I recommend, at least from what I've learned here? One is to focus on intensity, not the amount of time you spend, but on how intensely you're doing your workout, because that makes the biggest difference to your fitness. Right? And there's now a ton of literature on this as well. Right? The second thing is to try and train above your anaerobic threshold, and so you have to be able to measure that and to be able to train. And third is to track meaningful outcomes. So if you want to lose weight, track weight, but if you want to improve your health, track your fitness, because that's how you know if you're making a difference to the thing that you're trying to improve. Thank you.
Questions? So what did you do on the diet side? Did you keep that consistent the whole time?
That was pretty consistent. So I've not really fundamentally changed anything on the diet side. What I do notice is that when you go anaerobic, you burn fat, basically. So that's essentially the big change. So you don't burn carbohydrates when you exercise, you burn fat, and therefore you don't feel as hungry through, at least for about 12 to 24 hours after that. Right? So that's the fundamental change that happens when you go anaerobic, basically. So
I'd argue that statement, but
that's
I'm more curious about, did you get any, did you use, say, Insight Tracker, or do any labs before? Because it's interesting. I agree with you on the correlation on the MET and the fitness, but or on the, sorry, what you were saying before. But what I'm curious about is did you see lab data change internally, glucose, A1C, all these things? Because that's where I would wonder if those finally changed as the weight came down, and then you saw your fitness start to go up, and basically, your insulin resistance potentially went down.
Right. So I wasn't tracking insulin resistance, right? And neither was I tracking my glucose levels. I was tracking my blood pressure, which is actually a much more difficult target to move than blood glucose. Blood glucose moves with just with some amount of activity. You'll see an acute effect. Chronic effects are different. So if you have to change fundamentally insulin sensitivity, that's a different. But you do get acute effects on blood pressure and blood glucose. Blood pressure is much more difficult to change. If you look at kind of exercise data out there, meta-analysis, you change about, I think, 5 systolic units and about 2 to 3 diastolic units. When you're mildly hypertension, actually 4. So it's actually very difficult to move through exercise, just traditional exercise or conventional exercise. So you need to be able to exercise right, be able to move it. So on the other one, the fat one, we can talk offline, but that's not true though. There's a lot of good science showing that when you go anaerobic, you actually burn fat. You don't burn.
After, not during.
Sorry? Both during and after. Right. After in particular, because that's when you get the maximum. You burn only a small amount of calories during the session, but you get the maximum after. So.
So a few questions. Question one about your blood pressure. So you showed that it was around 127 and 18, and it decreased to 120. So So the question is it statistically significant? Because when even you test your blood pressure a few times,
Right.
you see that
Right.
jump.
So yeah, it's a really good point actually. So in fact, I spent a lot of time trying. So I haven't got into that as yet, but I spent a lot of time trying to make sure that my blood pressure numbers were right, because obviously you get a lot of variation. So you have to measure it 3 times, drop the first number, take the next 2 as the average. So that's the protocol that really gives you a much more stable result, right? And you have to do it at a certain time. If you do it early in the morning, it's going to be low. If you do it late at night, it's going to be higher. So you have to do it between about 10 to 12 in the morning for you to get an average that is more representative of your day. Not every day though. So I was doing it very regularly, but I think I literally had given up on seeing a change in my blood pressure. So after about October, I'd stop measuring my blood pressure. I think December was the last reading. So I would do it more sporadically.
And do you think that the difference between 127 and 120?
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, it is significant to the extent that I never had a reading that was anywhere close to it in all those 6 months of measuring my blood pressure. So it's an N of 1. So obviously it's very difficult to do a statistical test on it. And since then, I've never had a reading above 120 ever. So
what was your weight loss between 127 and 120? How much weight?
So between the time when my blood pressure moved, there was 0 weight loss. So practically, right? So there's a lot of weight loss early on, but that didn't change my blood pressure.
And another point is, if you want a good marker for fitness, I will look at hemoglobin, which is basically a great
Right.
indicative of a VO2 max. So if you want to find a cheap indicative of fitness, instead of going to this chamber and spend
Right, you don't have to though. So you don't have to actually go to the chamber and check. So the point was that you can actually measure fitness submaximally without having to do that, and you get pretty robust estimates if you do it with reasonable
So I think
consistency.
hemoglobin will be much better indicator of fitness than blood pressure.
So I'm not perhaps I don't know. I don't know the science behind hemoglobin, but I can tell you that fitness. There's about 2 decades of research behind it, showing that it's probably the single best predictor of health overall. So yeah. Oops. Sorry.
The device that you use to measure fitness, is that something that's available for home use, or is that something that's just in a laboratory setting?
So there are 2 ways in which you can do it, right? One is at a very simple level. If you can control your power, right? So if you're measuring your energy expenditure, and let's say you're measuring on a bike, you're measuring power, or on a treadmill, you're measuring the speed at which you're doing, or some other estimation that you can control, right? And then you measure your heart rate for the same quantum of activity that you've done. That's a very rudimentary measure of fitness. So if your heart rate starts to decline for the same amount of energy expenditure that you're doing, it means you're getting fitter, basically. That's kind of the core science behind all of it, right? So you can do it at home, but it does require that you control that quite efficiently to be able to do it. So part of what we're trying to do is kind of build that into the product that we're making now, which is an exercise bike that does that all of that in the back end.
Okay. And
But
the
it-
mask is part of that too?
No, you don't have to do that. You need a mask only if you're going to an exercise lab where you need this done at, that's the gold standard basically. But you can get pretty close. I think most submaximal tests done well give you 95%, which for consumer application is more than what you get. So.
Sorry, I remember seeing a cycle that might have been a demo cycle at another US meeting. So was there a demo station that you did, or is that somebody else?
November, I was demoing kind of very early prototype of the bike.
Okay, so how can you, in just maybe like 30 seconds,
Sure.
talk about what has happened to the bike since then?
Right. So I think at the point that I was doing that demo was when we were still playing with the protocol and the exercise science. We had cracked the technology side of things. We were trying to track kind of the biology side of things. And so since then, a lot of what has happened is exactly this. We've been playing with exercise protocols. So to see which of this works better, we've been testing on larger groups. So since then, I've tested actually on a number of other people. So we have now an N of 3 that shows pretty dramatic normalization of blood pressure in about in a pretty short period of time. And we're trying to build that hardware into something we can potentially scale up and sell. So it's still a long journey ahead, but it looks like we have some opportunity to build something there. Yeah.
Just a differentiation between quantity and intensity. Where do you see the impact trail off in quantity duration? Is there, I know there's a lot of science
Right.
that's
This.
done by.
Right. So So a lot depends on your goals, is what I'd say. And I know that's very generic, but I think that's true. And I think if you're trying to burn a lot of calories in one session, then you have to do quantity. You can't avoid having to do quantity, right? But if your goal is to improve your health, quantity. So let's say, for example, there's actually some really good data showing, for example, that being the most active person on the planet. I mean, you can be the most active person on the planet, but it doesn't give you as much health benefits as just increasing your fitness even marginally, right? So, and if you were to walk 10,000 steps, say, right, it takes about 6 months for you to start seeing a clinically meaningful benefit from a health perspective. In terms of your fitness increase, you'll see probably about 8 to 10% increase in your fitness, and you stop within 2 weeks, you'll lose all of that. So activity tends to be somewhat more, I mean, unless it makes a change within you, it tends to have more temporary effects. I'm really generalizing here, but it tends to have more, that's the right way of thinking about it. Whereas when you use the activity really as a tool to change your metabolic status, then you get more permanent effects.
So I'd like to actually ask a question about the process. When you
Right.
identified that you wanted to kind of improve your fitness to improve your heart rate, once you've done that, what resources did you use to kind of find what the next step was?
Right.
What to target and how to target it, and
Right.
which protocol to use?
So if from a measurement perspective, I think I kind of touched upon some of that stuff. And from an exercise protocol perspective, I just went back to exercise science literature, right? And if you look at exercise science, it's pretty compelling data showing that you get twice the benefit when you do interval training compared to conventional training on fitness. Just outstanding data, right? So there was recently actually a meta-analysis on BMJ that came up. So it is pretty obvious that I had to do interval training, right? The challenge with interval training is that there is such, interval training actually is infinite combinations. Literally, you could, in terms of intensity, in terms of duration, in terms of frequency, etc. So a lot of it, and there's not as much science in terms of telling you exactly what's the right protocol as there is broadly in terms of saying that, hey, interval training works better. So a lot of my effort was really to try and figure out how do I kind of get to the right point in terms of managing intensity and volume and frequency, right? And I think I still was, even though I knew conceptually that I should focus on intensity, but I was still mentally kind of still trying to maximize the amount of time I spent, because that's what I'd always done. I tried to run as fast as I could, as far as I could, and I hadn't completely left that world. And so I had to kind of see the data and see that it was not having an effect on me before I could kind of discard all of those old notions, so to speak, and start kind of embracing the science that existed. And so then I said, look, forget about volume. Let me just try and go as intensely as I can, right, in this. And then it worked, basically. So that's, this sounds more, let's say, scientific than actually it was in reality. In reality, it was a lot more experimentation, basically.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.